Hey everyone. Hi.
Hello. Hey,
Uh,
man. What's up?
hey. So Eyal unfortunately is under the weather, and we wish him good health. But fortunately for you, you get your favorite host back. So I'm uh, I'm Shai, and we have an amazing show today. Elad will be with me throughout, or hopefully throughout. We'll start with. Michael Antonio. He's a veteran developer with a lot of experience in Microsoft and Amazon, and a lot of infra as code mileage under his belt. Welcome to the Winglish show.
Thanks,
Hi,
Shai.
Michael.
Thanks, Elad. Hi.
Welcome, man. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Cool.
So, remind me, when was the first time we met? I'm trying to recall.
Oh, geez. I think it was sort of in the early days of the CDK. I was actually doing a lot of work around bringing existing CloudFormation into the CDK because Amazon, I don't know if you remember this, but we had a sort of a pre-CDK system. Exactly, a pre-DK system for deploying CloudFormation. And so I was asked by my manager to take the machine learning platform that we had, which was like 7 CloudFormation stacks. It was this huge thing. And we had deployed it to this one account, but the account was getting full in terms of like the number of buckets and the number of roles and all this kind of stuff. And so he wanted it to be in other accounts so that we could sort of have one account per project. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. I kind of built this toolkit for bringing in the CloudFormation and modifying it so that it would actually work with the CDK, because there were some issues with like CDK diff and some of the early tools that sort of didn't like overly complicated CloudFormation. And so I from the beginning was getting really sort of low level into the CDK and how synthesis worked and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember some functional programming idioms or some pretty cool constructs that you created at that time. That was caught my eye, I remember.
Yeah. So I have these. They're basically it's almost like another L1 transform or L1 construct called transform. And what it does is I actually proxy the to CloudFormation function, and I'm able to just sort of take the entire template and then make specific changes to it that I need in order for it to be able to deploy. And so that was sort of like the low level stuff that I was doing, and right away I'm right in the middle of synthesis, so a sort of being thrown into the deep end there.
Yeah, we actually have some Wing has some hooks in the compiler that are designed exactly to like throw you into the synthesis and be able to do these customizations. So I'm wondering if some of those ideas were kind of put into my head at that time, basically. Okay, sorry, I was just Shai. Please.
Well, it was interesting. Usually we do start with asking our guests how they started with the programming. So happy to hear your story.
Okay, so I actually started out taking a one of those algorithms classes, the Sedgwick book. I did Pascal programming at Brown University for a semester, and at the end of the semester, I enjoyed it so much that I decided to get a summer job doing programming on campus. And fortunately for me, they were just opening in the fall a new computer science building, and they wanted to have a kiosk there. And so I created this kiosk with like map of the building and all the different rooms, all the people who worked there, and links between them, and it was all done in HyperCard. You know, it actually had an early touch screen. I mean, you had to take the bezel off of the CRT monitor and then actually paste the touch screen on top of it and hook it into your USB. You had to calibrate it. It was like, you know, very early kind of touchscreen technology. And after the building opened, all of the computer science students decided that they wanted to play Crash the Kiosk. I would stand there in the hallway watching them crash the kiosk and just see what they were doing, and then see what was successful and see what was not working, and then, you know, if they were able to crash it, I was able to figure out that, oh, what they were doing is they would sort of go back and forth, and then they would that would cue up a lot of sounds to play, because HyperCard would just like want to play the sounds one after the other after the other. So I had to figure out how to get it to not do that, so they couldn't crash the kiosk. And that was kind of a fun introduction to software security.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right after that.
Yep. Yeah.
Interesting. And when was the first time that you got to actually play with the infrastructure?
Oh, okay. So that was 4 years ago. You know, as I was telling you guys that I worked on this project to bring in this ML platform, this machine learning platform that we had, and deploy it to all of these different accounts. And then as I was doing that, I suddenly realized that I had enough pieces that if I could just get the correct JSON from the correct internal services, I could just automatically convert our code from the old system into the CDK. So I just started doing that. You know, like if I had to work on a project, the first thing that I would do is convert it over to CDK. And it just made everything so much easier to work with. I didn't have to deal with, you know, our old system used Ruby code and Jinja and all this kind of stuff. And I was able to bring it in and just modernize everything. And people were really excited about that. And so now I actually have an internal Slack channel where I help other people in the company do the same thing. And I have an internal broadcast channel where I do videos about, like, you know, how to add provenance data to your stack, so you know, like, what build created it and things like that. And I've come up with a number of techniques like inline code. And this is really useful to be able to just write your Lambda handlers directly in your CDK project. And then I just sort of slurp that code in by just, you know, doing a read file sync. And that just gets deployed as part of the CloudFormation template rather than having to be a separate zip file. It's really convenient for things like if you're writing a step function and you need to do some massaging of the inputs. Usually the step function intrinsics just aren't powerful enough for the kinds of things that I want to do. Like if I'm running, if I have a step function that runs multiple step functions, and I want the execution IDs to coordinate between them, so I can see, like, find the parent and find all the children in the console really easily. And so that kind of thing is really easy to do if you have an inline Lambda. And if you're trying to create a zip file, or you're doing anything that adds any amount of difficulty to creating those Lambdas, it sort of becomes not worth it. So this is one of the things that I really like about Wing, is the fact that you guys are putting the code right there. And I think that, you know, it just eases the ability to create a Lambda to such an extent that you're just going to do it all the time.
That's the whole.
What are you doing for dependencies if you're JavaScript, or is it just for like little JavaScript code that doesn't have any dependencies? That's
in this case. So for dependencies, I'm just using what's available in the Lambda runtime. So the Lambda runtime has, so basically the way that I describe it to other people in the company who use this inline Node.js function is you can export anything that you want from that inline code, but you can't import anything from the rest of your project. Otherwise, it just won't work. You know, and if you want to do bundling, well, then you should just go off and use Node.js
go
function.
do bundling.
Right. And then, yeah, go do bundling. But if you don't need any, and it's amazing how much you can get done. For example, I have a construct called step function task, which will run a step function from CloudFormation and then monitor it for up to 4 days. So what I basically do is I have a custom resource that you pass it a step function arn and input, and then it will start the step function and it will monitor it for an hour. And then when that's done, it passes it off to another custom resource with the same code. That one, however, gets the step function execution arn. And so then it takes that execution arn and it monitors it for an hour. And that can go, like I said, for up to 4 days, because after 4 days, CloudFormation forgets about you. You know, I mean, you would think it should be 20 because there are like you can put 500 resources into a CloudFormation stack, so that, you know, for an hour for each of those, that gets you to about 20 days. But really, 4 days is the maximum. After that, CloudFormation just like, yeah, you don't exist anymore.
And so what's the use case for like a CloudFormation stack to be deploying? It's basically a stack that's been deploying for 4 days, right? Like that.
Yeah. Mostly what I need is like anywhere from like 4 to 12 hours. You know, I did the 4 days just to see how long it would go. But but it's things like we I'm in the Kuiper group. And so we do satellites, you know, and so what we have is we have these chips called FPGA chips. These are field programmable gate arrays. And what it is it's a piece of hardware where you can actually change the logical gates on the chip. And to lay that out is a process that takes several hours. And the normal thing that people would have done is they would have done that as a test, because our test framework can go for up to 12 hours. Well, you know, for various reasons, I couldn't use that. And so I just ended up trying to figure out, well, how am I going to do this in CloudFormation? And so it was just like, you know, I had thought about using, you know, there are various things that they use for EC2 functions where you can have like a signal that you send. And I looked at that and it just looked way too complicated. And I said, well, you know, I do a lot of stuff with custom resources. And I figured, well, you can call anything from a step function. So if the only thing I support is step functions, then I can call basically any execution environment and I can just, you know, go for as many hours as I like. And the really nice thing is by using the dependencies in CloudFormation, I'm able to like
orchestrate.
Exactly. Yeah, I use it as an orchestration engine, and it's actually kind of a wonderful orchestration engine. I can write data to S3. I can read data from S3 with this step function task. The last custom resource that it runs is the one that I get the attributes from, because that one I know I can call describe step function and I can get the output, and then I can expose those as attributes, and then the next task that I run can take inputs from that step function that just finished. So it's really neat being able to use, I mean, obviously step function does orchestration, but so does CloudFormation, and now I'm using CloudFormation all of the time.
So you basically have like a custom resource in CloudFormation that deploys FPGAs.
That lays out FPGA. Yeah,
it lays out FPGAs.
Yeah,
deploys the hardware for the satellites.
Yep. And then, you know, of course, after that, you have to sign it. You know, like you would do like dev signing, and then you have to do hardware in the loop testing, and then you do production signing, and then you go to the flat sat. And, so there are all these different stages and all of these different tests that we have to run. And so what I've been doing to try to keep the artifacts, and this is what I'm doing these days, I'm doing artifact management. So, these FPGA images, embedded code, map tiles, ML models, they all basically have the same problems, which is where you do a build, and when your build is done, you're not done. You're just beginning your journey to getting the artifact that you want at the end. And so what I've been doing is I've been putting these things into S3 and then partitioning my S3 bucket by build ID. So that way it's very easy for each stack knows what the build ID was for that stack. And so it knows, this is the bucket that has the artifacts. This is the folder I need to go in because it's this build ID. Under that, there might be like an FPGA folder, and there might be like a signed images folder. And so each stage does a different part of this. And then it knows what the previous stage was. And so then it can go read like, oh, that previous stage was successful. Here's where the artifacts are that I need to sign. Now I'm going to go dev sign them. Now that they're dev signed, the next thing knows, oh, I can set up the hardware in the loop testing, and then I can go do my testing, And then at the end of this, now I have this signed artifact, and how am I going to send this to other people, right? And so, what I've done is I've started using Git LFS for this. So I now have a custom resource that can read in an S3 prefix, and then push that to a Git LFS repository. And so now I have sort of a generic way to get my resources and put them into Git LFS, put a tag on there saying what the build ID was so that the provenance data is not lost in the process. And then at that point, since I've pushed it to Git, now we have GitOps starting and a whole bunch of other pipelines that need to take that artifact and do something with them. And so I've been playing with this for a while, and I'm really happy with the way that it works out.
Well, how long does the entire process take?
Oh, it's days. Because there are multiple pipelines involved, and at the end of this, you're going to be taking software and sending it up to the satellite. So obviously, we have a lot of checks in place. We have a lot of different testing steps that we do. We have to test the beam forming and intersatellite communication and all of this kind of stuff. It's been really exciting for me to realize that at this point in my career, now suddenly the space industry has a use for my talents. It's something I've always wanted to get into and never really had a way to do before. But with Amazon sending up satellites, it's very exciting now.
And you're able to you basically use the tools that you're. I love the repurposing. I had a sort of a similar experience with. I spent my first couple of years at Amazon at Prime Air, the drone project.
Oh yeah,
and it was kind of similar because it was like me trying to get like the standard built and deployment tools to work for drones.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm very familiar with these kind of. It's beautiful, right? Like it's all the same. Eventually, it's just orchestrating and dependency graphs, and so I love that. Good tools can be really, really powerful in that way if you're able to use them for different.
Oh yeah, and the amount of developer work that is going away is enormous. Just the amount of time that developers spend like downloading artifacts, manually signing them, uploading them to to S3 or to Git it's just enormous. And being able to save that time and I think one of the really big issues with this is observability, because there are so many different steps along the way that it's sort of difficult for people to process like, okay, I have a custom resource, I have a step function, I have an AWS batch or an ECS task, and which log file do I need to look at? Like, how do I figure this? This is sort of like the next big problem in this space that I'm looking at.
So you're gonna basically, the log can be just another artifact that gets produced and gets like you can start. You can move it with the artifact, basically.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. I had not actually thought about doing that. Of course, all of our log files are in AWS. So yeah, and so we should be able to do that without too much trouble. That might actually make it easier for people. Having some sort of a console, like an artifact console, for people to be able to look at and see like where along the chain of events did this thing end up stopping and why.
Yep.
So what did you tell us a little bit about Microsoft? Like what did you work on there?
Oh, geez. I worked on.
You're based in Seattle, right?
I'm based in Seattle, yeah. So I came to Seattle in '95 during sort of the big internet gold rush. Like I was in Chicago. I was actually working for a company which is now called Accenture. I was doing like multimedia stuff for them. We had like these really early PCs with 7 boards in them just to do digital video. It was like, it was like we had these 7 boards and there were like these ribbon cables that went between them. And then you would have to like open up like a black box on the screen so that the video could show inside that black box, because, the computers were just not fast enough to be able to do digital video themselves. But Intel like gave us these boxes, and it was really awesome. So I was, in '95 when the internet really hit, I was like, well, I should go out and do some multimedia stuff. So I interviewed with Disney, I interviewed with Microsoft, I interviewed with a bunch of different companies, and I ended up at Microsoft working for a guy who I can really only describe him as Batman. I mean, Nick Clay was just a wonderful manager, and very very cool. Always wore black. Had a really great sports car. I mean, these were really like the shrimp days at Microsoft when they always took us out to really nice lunches. And I remember my very first. Oh, it's amazing. My very first.
By the way, both Shai and me used to work at Microsoft as well. Maybe a little later, but
yeah, I did not know that. Well, my first one-on-one, my manager had a view of the fountain. This was in the old campus there. I think some of those buildings are gone now, but she had a view of the fountain. And while we were in the middle of our one-on-one, Windows 95 shipped. So all of a sudden, everybody streamed, like the Windows 95 buildings were right across the other side of the fountain. Everybody streamed out of the buildings and started like running into the fountain and throwing people in the fountain and dancing around. And then all of a sudden, all these white vans showed up. Like you've never seen these vans come so quickly. And people came out with champagne bottles and cupcakes, and they just had like this marvelous party out there because Windows 95.
I remember that launch as a kid. I was 15, and I remember the New York Times or the New York Times Square or something like that had like a huge billboard. I remember it was a very big launch, very successful, right? Like I think one of the most successful launches Microsoft had ever. Almost missed the internet though.
Oh yeah. So I worked on. So at that point, I was working on imaging, and all the graphics gods were there, like Jim Blinn and Alvy Ray Smith, like guys from Pixar, were all working at Microsoft at that point. And so I worked on like Image Composer, PhotoDraw, which I'm sure you've never heard of either of those. I worked on PowerPoint, which I'm sure you have heard of. I ended up fixing a lot of buffer overrun bugs in Excel during the great, buffer overrun scare that we had sort of at the end of the
When they,
90s and the beginnings of the
yeah,
2000s. You know,
when they added all the n functions to the C standard library.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. I basically went through all of the Excel code and moved it from the old functions to the new functions, and that was a lot of work, but also very interesting and a lot of fun. I certainly learned a lot doing that, and I worked for a lot of like hardware groups, like Windows Media Center. We sort of had like a TiVo style thing, which was really interesting because when I started at Microsoft, I had said that I wanted to work on something that got reviewed in Entertainment Weekly. And then that actually happened with Media Center. Like they did like a Media Center versus TiVo versus Roku versus a few other things. And so that was really neat, like saying, oh my God, that actually happened. I worked on, do you remember oh yeah, checkbox there. Yeah, mischief managed. Do you remember the Connect? It's sort of like,
just to bring it up.
Yeah.
That's the most I remember from my time in Microsoft.
Yeah, I actually worked on Connect for Windows. So you could attach multiple Connects to your Windows box. And so I wrote the code that coordinated which motor went with which camera. Because, of course, on an Xbox, you only have one of them. So you don't really care. Like, it's just you find the camera, you find the motor. But with Connect for Windows, I had to make sure that the correct motor and the correct camera were together by like going through the USB tree. And that was like sort of low level. I did everything from low level in that group all the way up to the managed code. So basically like the C# API for accessing that. I worked on Xbox and Xbox One. I worked on Zune. Oh yeah. I was the performance lead for the Zune website, which was
that was like admittedly one of the shortest stints, right? Like kind of like canceled pretty quickly, I remember.
Oh, let me tell you,
Shai and I were also I think kind of connected to that at some point. I don't know, maybe.
Oh, did you have a Zune? Did you ever use one?
I think I did. I think it was the same time when we were at Microsoft.
Excellent.
I don't think I used one. I wouldn't, even if I did, I wouldn't.
Well, I think the UX, anyway, that doesn't matter.
It lasted a lot longer than Fire Phone, which was the first thing that I worked on when I came over to Amazon. I had worked on geography products over at Microsoft, like MapPoint and Streets and Trips and an early version of Bing Maps. And so then when I came over to Amazon, what they wanted me for was Amazon Maps on the Fire Phone. Okay. And so that was great. I learned, because I just left Microsoft, 18 years there. And when I got to Amazon, it was like everything was different. It was Unix, it was Git, it was it was Android, and so I started learning like Android programming and did that for a number of years, and that was a wonderful time. I mean, and really very like hardware focused, but unfortunately that went quicker than Zune. I mean, that was out for just a few months before they canceled that project.
Yeah. There was a quick pull.
Yep.
There's a question from Ayush. What did you work on when you were at Xbox?
Oh, okay. So on Xbox, what I worked on was we were doing a video app for the Xbox, and so we wanted to do a video service, and so we were doing sort of two parts. We were doing like the Xbox version, and we were doing the web version. And what happened was we went to the Xbox team and they said, we want to do this thing. And so they gave us a bunch of hardware and said, go away. Right. And so then we came back to them 6 months later and we had this thing working. And they were like, oh, my God, you have this thing working. We didn't think you were ever going to come back. What do we do with you now? And so what they did was that's when I got into Zune, because the Zune website, they also wanted to do video. And so we thought, well, okay, we can do the same videos. We can sell them for the Zune and we can sell them for the Xbox. And so that's how I started working on Zune. And then, after I got the video pages up and running there, and the our player was in Silverlight,
I remember that.
Oh yeah,
XAML.
yeah, oh yeah, that brings back memories, doesn't it? Yeah, Silverlight, and so that was really, really kind of like how I ended up getting into Zune, was by starting off working in Xbox, and then all of the Xbox media stuff was also Zune media, and then Zune just kind of got folded into Xbox once they decided to stop selling the hardware.
So you basically spent the last 29 years working in big tech across the pond, the two sides of the pond in Seattle, right?
35
years.
35, because I was in New York for 2 years and I was in Chicago for 5, and that was all with Accenture. So that was, that wasn't as big as Amazon and Microsoft, but it was still programming,
Yeah.
So-
and where are you based in Seattle? Sorry for sorry.
Oh, I'm just like I'm on the north side is where I live, but our offices are all in Redmond.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So a little bit of a commute. And when I left Microsoft, I thought, well, I'm not going to have to do that commute anymore because Amazon is in Seattle.
It's on the right side of the.
Exactly, the right side of the lake here. But now I just find myself going over to Redmond a few times a week, and that's fine,
Yeah, it is a beautiful drive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never been there. I mean, worked 5 years at Microsoft, never visited the campus in Redmond, but maybe I'll get that chance one day to come and see. But I was wondering, how was you talked about the difference in technology moving from Microsoft to Amazon. I remember similar experience moving from Microsoft to a startup. But what about culturally? How was that change?
Well, I was at Microsoft when Bill was there. And so I actually got to meet Bill at this very big, like he wanted to meet all of the new technical hires. And so there were like a few hundred of us in this ballroom downtown Seattle. And it was very different in those days, having the founder still in charge of the company. And then I was there when Ballmer took over. And there was definitely a big shift in terms of, when I got to Microsoft, it was sort of cult-like. And then when Ballmer took over, it just became sort of more of a job, And Amazon, I would say that there have been a lot of changes since, since we lost our founder, since he sort of went off to do space stuff, I would say
to meet the satellites on the other side.
Exactly. So, I will say that working for a company when the founder is there is a lot more exciting, and there's a lot of feeling that you sort of know who this person is, and you have like a really clear direction. And then when somebody else comes in, I think it just kind of takes a while for that to take hold again.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a really challenging. I really appreciate both Microsoft and Amazon. I think have been very, very conscious about this transition and the fact that it takes 10 years or something for these transitions to actually settle down. And I remember I was there when Bezos left too, and I feel like it was super conscious decision, super intentional, but also acknowledging that it's going to be hard for the company to stabilize after such a huge change. And I'm humbled by what happened at Microsoft, actually, right? Because we were there when it was Ballmer days,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely didn't feel like the right DNA, right? Like there was definitely a feeling that Ballmer was not the right leader for the company. Maybe it was the right leader, but at some point it wasn't the right match. And it's pretty amazing what happened to Microsoft since then. So I feel like Amazon's going through some interesting, turmoil. Cool. I think we gotta finish, right, Shai?
Yeah. We have Mark with the change log and some music. But thank you so much for coming to the show, Michael. It was really a pleasure to hear your story and talk to you.
Thank you, Shai. Thank you, Elad. I had a really great time.
Thanks. Talk to you later. Bye, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye.